Hello everybody and welcome back to Sweet and Sour Soccer and welcome back to another week of Premier League predictions. And guys, I think we're about week 24, aren't we now? So we're really getting into the business side of the season. And I think it's really interesting this season. You know, I was worried at one point, was it going to be a bit of a rubbish all-round season? But we seem to have finally got a bit of a relegation battle. We've got 3 teams at the top going for it and a lot of teams still within that fight for the European spaces. So this week, like all of them, is going to be very, very important. Guys, for those of you keeping up with our weekly Premier League predictions between myself and James, it was a successful one for me. In fact, we were drawing all the way through until Chelsea made it 3-1 against Crystal Palace, which gave me the extra 2 bonus points for getting the correct scoreline. And I end up winning the week 8-6. But as you can see, we're very close in this one. So let's get into these. And as always, I will put James's predictions up at the end of the video as well. So first up, we've got Brentford, who take on Liverpool. And I think this one, a lot of people would go for Liverpool in this one, but I was kind of toying with my own scoreline for this one because Brentford are very resilient. And I think at home they have potential to cause an upset. We've seen them do it before against some of these bigger teams. They've also, you know, they show good signs and they're a good defensive unit. I think Wolves last week, my team, really struggled to break them down when they had so many people behind the ball. The problem is, though, I do think Liverpool are really showing really good signs of quality at the moment. And even though they're not performing at the best, as we saw against Burnley, they are getting the job done and they have got attackers that can hurt you. And I think that by itself will be that little bit too much for Brentford. And of course, we've got 2 games that we're going to predict Brentford for. They've got a bit of a tough week ahead, Liverpool and then Man City. That's going to be the bonus game this week. But yeah, I'm going to back Liverpool and I'm going to go 3-1 in this scoreline. Next up, we have Burnley, who take on Arsenal. And again, this is going to be a hard game for Burnley, but they have got to somehow pick up some points somewhere. And they've got an opportunity again at Arsenal at Turf Moor. It's not going to be an easy game, though, because Arsenal last week looked very, very good. They absolutely hammered West Ham. And, you know, they're making sure that they're going to be within this title race. I don't see Arsenal slipping up. I think they'll get the job done quite comfortably. I'm going to give Burnley a goal, but I'm going to go Arsenal 4, Burnley 1. Let's move on to Newcastle next, who take on Bournemouth. And of course, not the best of weeks for Newcastle by looks of it, because Man United are after one of their main backroom staff, of course, the guy that has been really heavily responsible for their good recruitment since the money's coming in. He's getting approached by Man United. And we're also hearing rumblings, aren't we, of whether Newcastle United are going to be able to spend much this summer because of the FFP constraints. But apart from having, you know, trillionaire owners, apparently that's not going to be enough because of the FFP rulings. People have got mixed feelings on that. Is it a good thing for football, or is it just basically to make the big boys all the time and stop people like Newcastle from basically upsetting the big 6? Of course, people do have their opinions on this, but they are getting players back from injury. Unfortunately, one of those won't be Isaac. It looks like his injury has now extended and he will be out for a considerable amount of time. I do think, though, they will just have enough to beat this Bournemouth team, who have seemed to have dropped off a little bit. At one stage, they were really coming through with good form, but that does seem to have faded away a little bit. So I'm going to go for Newcastle to get the job done, especially at home. I'm going to go for a narrow 2-1 scoreline in this one. Hi guys, just a quick one for me before we get back to the video. If you've watched us before, you already know what I'm about to say. If you can do us a massive, massive favour, hit that like button for us. And if you're new here and you're enjoying the video, why not subscribe too? And guys, remember to tune in for our weekly live Premier League live every single Sunday. We're going to be doing it about midday this Sunday, so be there. Come on, now let's get back to these Premier League predictions. Next up, we have Fulham versus Aston Villa. And a few weeks ago, you'd probably say, well, this is going to be an Aston Villa win for sure. But it's not so easy to predict now. Of course, Aston Villa, they've gone into a little bit of a sticky form patch and they are losing players as well, unfortunately for them, through injury. I think it was Kamara, wasn't it, the latest one? But it looks like he's going to be out for the rest of the season. And it's going to be interesting to see how Villa actually go through this period. Can they get out of this little sticky patch and get back on track to securing that top 4 place, or just Europe in general, because of course they have got a bit of a gap at the moment, but the table is catching up with them, with some teams starting to hit form. One of those teams that won't catch them, but are hitting good form, is Fulham. They are looking like a very solid mid-table team now. They obviously brought Broja, but it isn't Broja that's getting the goals. It's another guy that they did bring in, obviously. And I wonder what Broja's thinking after his signing. He probably thought that he was going to get into this team pretty easy. Well, up steps another goal scorer, and he's back to sitting on the bench. I think this is going to be a good game, and I actually think Fulham will get something out of this game. I've not given the win, but I am going to go for 1-1 scoreline in this one. We move on next to Nottingham Forest versus West Ham, and this is going to be a good game because two teams which are under pressure for different reasons. You know, for Forest, they've got to start getting some points on the board. I think they've got their players back from the African Cup of Nations. Of course, Willy Bolly and Sangre, wasn't it, the other one? They were involved in actually winning the African Cup of Nations. I don't know if they're going to be back fully or whether we'll see them feature on the bench. But of course, from next games week, for sure, they're going to be back to their kind of full strength. And they have got our Nui. It'll be interesting to see if he can get back to his goal scoring form before the injury, of course, because he was so deadly for them. And they do need a goal scorer to make sure that they don't get into relegation this season. West Ham, of course, they're not the other side of the table, but that doesn't mean that there isn't pressure on David Moyes, the West Ham manager. And after a heavy defeat to Arsenal, I think the West Ham fans are going to be expecting a win here, or at least wanting a win. Maybe not expecting because of how bad they're actually playing at the moment under Moyes, but the pressure is mounting on him, and I think he could really do with a win. Unfortunately, I don't think either of these teams are going to get the win. I just have a feeling with Forest at home, they will get something out of this game. But again, I've gone for another 1-1 draw in this one. Next up, we have Spurs, who take on my team, Wolverhampton Wanderers. And disastrous news for my team, Wolves. Cunha, one of the main players for us, absolutely fantastic. Probably the most important player on the team, you know, just because we've really got nobody that can come in and replace him. Probably going to have to use a very young Nathan Fraser, guys. For those of you that aren't Wolves fans, he's a very young striker, looks to have a lot of potential, but I don't think he's quite at that Premier League level. So you could see how it's going to be a really big hit for us. Coming up against a Spurs team who were getting players back from injury and starting to hit a little bit of form. Of course, it was a late goal, wasn't it, in their last game? A huge moment for those Spurs fans and the Spurs players. And I feel like they're a team picking up a little bit of confidence too. I think for that reason, especially at home, unfortunately, I'm not going to back my team. I'm going to go for a Spurs victory. I think I'm going to go for, what have I gone for? I need to double check. I've gone for a 2-1 Spurs win in this one. Let's move on to Manchester City next, who take on Chelsea. And this is going to be a big game, isn't it, in itself? Obviously, two clubs that in previous seasons would be a lot closer to each other in the table. But at the moment, both really do need a win. Man City, they've got to keep going, haven't they, of course, to win this Premier League title. And they've got Liverpool and Arsenal giving them such good competition. But they, you know, they're taking on Chelsea, a team who we don't know what you're going to get. Of course, they managed to get the win against Crystal Palace. Didn't look convincing in the first half, but the second half became more of what you think Chelsea should maybe be doing with all the money they've spent and with all the players they've got. This is going to be a tough game, I think, and I do think City will just have that bit too much, say, for Chelsea. I'm not going to go for a big scoreline, though. I'm going to narrowly give it to Manchester City, and I'm going to go 2-1 to City. Let's move on next to Sheffield United, who take on Brighton, and a weird one for Chris Wilder, obviously the Sheffield United manager, who's been disciplined by the FA for calling the linesman, I believe it was, a sandwich eater. I don't think there was any wrong innuendo behind that. But yeah, he's been punished by the FA for it. And it was a real shame, actually, off the back of what was a good win against Luton Town last week. And they needed that to have any chance of survival. The question is, can they perform the Great Escape? Well, they've got to keep on maybe getting some points on the board. And it's not going to be easy against a Brighton team who, despite Sheffield United being at home, this is one of these that I really toyed with for a second. I was like, are Sheffield United going to do something? I've not quite seen enough to convince me that they can go and beat Brighton. So I gave it to Brighton, and I've actually gone for 3-1 to Brighton in this one. Let's move on next to Luton Town, a team that I just spoke about, who'd be massively, massively disappointed that they didn't get a victory against Sheffield United, because if they had done, things would have been looking actually quite rosy for them. They would have had a few points away from relegation, and, you know, the vibe would have been really up. They come up against a hard test in Manchester United. Now, again, a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago, this would have been a tougher one to call, because Man United haven't been looking convincing all season, but they do seem to have now just started to get into form. And of course, it was Scott McTominay last week who managed to get that important victory for them against a good Aston Villa side, albeit Villa aren't in the best of form. So I am going to go for Manchester United in this one. I do think they'll get the job done. I've gone Manchester United 2, Luton 0. Let's move on to, I think we've got 2 games left, because obviously we've got another additional game, Man City coming up against Brentford. But before we speak about this one, let's speak about Everton versus Crystal Palace. And 2 fan bases that probably aren't too happy at the moment are for, again, I was going to say for different reasons, but kind of the same reasons, because Crystal Palace, they probably feel they've got enough to stay up, but I think they're just a bit sick of staying up every season. The same could be said for Everton. They're sick of being constantly in a relegation battle. They've obviously got all their FFP troubles. And it's one of those, I think both teams could do with a win here. Of course, for Crystal Palace, it would give them that bit more comfort. For Everton, it would pull them out of the relegation zone, because they really do need to get out of it, whether it's going to be through maybe getting some of the points back that they were deducted, or just actually doing it on the pitch. Of course, they haven't been in great form recently. They can get a result at Goodison. But I've gone for a draw again in this one. I've gone for another 1-1 draw. I fancy both teams to get a point out of it. And last up, we have Man City taking on Brentford, of course, a game which is the additional game. I think it's like Tuesday next week, is it? These guys play. I'm not going to speak about this one for too long. No surprise, I've backed Manchester City, and I've gone for a 2-0 victory in this one. I do fancy City to get the job done. Guys, those are my predictions, and on screen at the moment, if you do want to pause it, there's James's predictions as well that you can take a look at. And of course, if you have enjoyed the video, do me a favor, hit that like button. Please do subscribe too. And if you're new here, and we will be back next week for another round of Premier League predictions. Have a good week all. Take care. Goodbye.